Welcome back to the Dreaming and Doing podcast. I am super excited about today's guest. I am here with Courtney Jones, who is a licensed clinical social worker and entrepreneur who works with people who, well, one, she has a ton of specialized experience and training. I'm not even going to read all of that for you, but to kind of sum it all up, she does a lot of work with individuals who are dealing with trauma, substance use, and one of the things that I find super interesting about Courtney's work is that she does equine therapy. So today, Courtney is going to be here with me talking about authenticity. Welcome, Courtney. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. So, Courtney, there are two reasons why I wanted to talk with you today about this topic of authenticity. One, so just I guess to give everybody some background information, you and I met at a networking event that we were both going to, and I was talking about the retreat that I was hosting in Costa Rica, and you were like, wait, hold on, I saw that advertised somewhere. And so we met, and you were like, I think this must be a sign. And sure enough, you signed up shortly after. That's how we met. But when we were in Costa Rica and we were kind of getting to know everybody, one of the things that you said that really stuck with me at the very beginning was that one of the things that you were really wanting from the experience was authentic relationships. And that stood out to me because it's something that's really important to me too. So, talk with me about what makes authenticity and having authentic relationships so important to you.
That's a good question. So, to also share about the first time we met, I actually had the retreat in the basket. I just
That's
hadn't bought it yet.
so
And I'm like,
funny.
do I go? Do I not go? And then when I saw you and we met, I was like, all right, I'm going. We're gonna go.
Yes.
It was great. Really, honestly, sometimes those marketing events, they're awesome, but they're really not authentic, and it's exhausting when you get into
Mm-hmm.
these spaces with other clinicians and you feel like you're just kind of hitting all the points, you know what I mean, of who you are and what you do, but there's not a lot of connection, and then it's next on to the next one. So sharing that intimate space with everyone, I really wanted to make sure that we can maybe get a little bit deeper than some of the surface stuff.
Yes. And that's actually one of the things that I wrote down here on my paper to ask you about today. You didn't even know that. But that was one of the things that I wrote down is that sometimes, when we're in these professional arenas, including networking events, the conversation is very superficial. This is who I am. This is what I do, blah, blah, blah. And we never connect again.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Um, So, and also I in the equine work, I'm going to ask you about this later on, but one of the conversations that we did have that you had mentioned while we were in Costa Rica was that horses are actually really good at gauging someone's sense of authenticity. So, for all of those reasons, I wanted to have you here and talk about this particular topic. Um, so I think there's a lot of challenges, at least that I see around authenticity. You mentioned one of them, like going to professional networking events, and it's maybe not very authentic. Um, Sometimes when people are moving into new professional roles or you're in a bigger room than one that you were in previously, sometimes people feel like they can't be their professional selves
Mhm.
because maybe there's an underlying belief that who I am and what I bring to the table is not really good and won't be accepted. Um, and also, on the other extreme end of the spectrum, I also see people, at least in professional services or the business world, who really talk up their services, how amazing they are, and then they don't deliver, under deliver, which is also maybe not being so authentic. So, you're an entrepreneur, you're a therapist. I'm wondering what has allowed you or what has helped you to show up as your authentic self?
That's a good question too. I think first of all, shout out to my own therapy. Yes, honestly. But I think being in this role has really allowed for me to feel like my authentic self. And then the trust that my colleagues and the providers here have in me for their employment makes me feel like I can't give anything less than that. Also, to being a parent, like my kids, they really help me be my most authentic and best self. Yeah. And they'll show me two areas that I need to make improvements on. Yeah. But
Yes. That's so funny. I wasn't thinking about that, but you're right. If a child thinks that someone is not being authentic, they will let you know.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, and also as someone who manages an office, right? I think sometimes the challenge is also encouraging people, our therapists, to be their authentic selves, right? Um, what are some of the things that you do to encourage the people on your team to show up as their truest selves?
I think when we think about the art of therapy, it's really like what drives the work. Like, why did you get into it? And how can you lead with that in, a really professional but authentic way? Because we as therapists, like that, we are the tool when we come into
Mm-hmm.
that space, who we are and the relationship that we can build with patients really is the only way that interventions, can be fruitful. So, and then I'm learning because my practice was built from trauma. Like I went through a workplace trauma, I was going through a divorce. And so all those things helped me step out onto my own. And so I'm helping all of the practitioners here unlearn what they learned in other settings. So sometimes it really is about like, tell me how you're really feeling about this situation or about this patient, and then a lot of times, even when folks are late with their notes, it's like, I think you're avoiding telling me that we're past this deadline, but let's communicate. I'm here to support you. And just coming into that space in a different way really helps the provider show up as their authentic selves too. So I think that that's really powerful. And then we take that into our session. It's like a ripple effect.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point because I think that there are times where people are invited to be their authentic selves. And I think sometimes there's maybe some like skepticism around that, or like, do they really mean that? I don't believe them because of past experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like being your authentic self, but with professional parameters.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's a caveat because I can't, like I got dressed up for this, you know what I mean? But my authentic self really would have probably had my hair up and a mess and no makeup on.
Yes.
So I do think that there's components of it and nuances, but at the same time, we have to also, um, have professional boundaries, which is, it's like an art form. It's like a balance.
Yes, I love that. I'm over here smiling because our clinical supervisor regularly says that when we're having this conversation or talking about, like, we want your feedback. She's always like, with parameters, with professionalism, we want your input. That doesn't mean you have to be like super opinionated, about things that, just to have an opinion. So yes, being your authentic self while wearing your professional hat.
Exactly.
Yes. So I love that. Now, Courtney, you still do therapy work, right? And I know that I find a lot of our clients that we work with struggle to like allow themselves to be their authentic self. I'm wondering how you see that topic show up with your clients at your practice or clients that you've worked with over the years. How do you see that theme showing up?
It's a defense mechanism, and so learning a patient and learning about their life and interacting with them and then also taking the time to get to know them helps, be able to kind of acknowledge if you are or not showing up as your authentic self and how can I help you get there. But it's about the trust, it's about the rapport. If you don't have that, if I'm not coming into this space giving that, I can't ask for a patient, to give it.
So really modeling that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah,
And
which is, oh, go ahead.
no, it can be something just as, like simple as like right now I'm sitting with my legs crossed. That's what's most comfortable for me. It's not this huge glaring unprofessional stance. It's not what I learned in social work school, but this I'm my comfortable, most authentic self right now sitting in this space. So get comfortable, and
Mm-hmm.
modeling that can be really helpful.
Yeah, this conversation is making me think about, well, one, going to school, right? I think historically speaking, when you go to school to be a social worker or a counselor, you receive messages, about how counseling or therapy used to be done. Like you are the blank slate,
Right.
right? So simultaneously, we talk about like having this relationship and that being the most important aspect. But many of us have also been taught to be this blank slate, which is kind of reserving yourself and not presenting your most authentic self in the room. I think the field is changing, but I do still think that that can be a struggle for people as they're maybe entering into the field to say, how do I do that? I was kind of taught not to.
Exactly. Like I was taught to sit straight up with my hands flat on my legs and my feet on the floor. That is so stuffy. I'm feeling stuffy. And then I know I utilize a lot of polyvagal that neuroception translates, to my patient. So they're feeling the stuffiness. How can they let their guard down if I'm showing up in that space? And for me too, and it's a craft, it's an art form. So over the years, kind of learning, some patients are really, the feedback is great when you can be like, that fucking sucked, and use authentic language in the space. Or we are trained to not be, expressive, but sometimes things warrant an expressive look because some things are really hard and heavy. And then,
Mm-hmm.
and then it also can model empathy because you can have another, expressive way where it's like, oh, this must have been really hard, and then that makes people feel so validated and seen, which then they can be their authentic self in the space.
Yes. And so I'm hearing like there are multiple layers here, right? Like one for your team, you have to model authenticity for your team. You then hope that your therapist will show up authentically with their clients so that the clients can also, um, you know, kind of lean into allowing themselves to be their most authentic selves. And I'm wondering, how do you navigate that also as a business owner, right? That that aspect that you mentioned earlier, where it's like on one hand, I need to be my most authentic self to model that behavior so they too can be their most authentic selves. But with those caveats, how do you also navigate that, right? Like the role of an entrepreneur, especially one if you're managing a team, can be super challenging and complicated, super stressful some days. How do you manage one showing up authentically while also having that knowing that like maybe the way that I'm really feeling today, I have to manage that, or how do you navigate that for yourself?
Well, it's a still a learning process for sure. But being as though we're a trauma informed practice and it's at the core of who we are, I know that transparency is trauma informed. And so sometimes I just lead with transparency and that's how I'll open it up. Like if we need to have a hard conversation, I'm not going to come into the space in a shame based fashion, in a punitive way. I know that there's so much workplace trauma and that's how it is, but we still need to have a serious conversation. So we can open it up. How's your week? How are you? It's good to see you. We talked about this last time. How's your dog or whatever it is? And then it's like, hey, I have to transition. I have to transition into something less than favorable. Are you ready for it? And then we'll
Mm-hmm.
come into that space and have the conversation and then kind of bookend it with, what did you hear? You know, what are we on? Are we on the same page with this? And then sending them out. So I think that it's just a balance of both. Yeah. But I think that when you are your authentic self, and boundaries are healthy and important, and you kind of acknowledge that from the beginning. Like, yes, there's a lot of creative freedom in the work. It's an art form. Learn your craft, specialize, but you still got to see a patient for 53 minutes, and that note is still due. And, we
Mm-hmm.
still have to show up on time. And I think our boards and Comar and all these regulations help me help maintain those professional boundaries because it's not just my way. It's, I mean, it's the Board of Social Work.
Yeah. And
Comar.
so
Yeah.
many other places that govern how we practice.
So many.
Yes. If people only knew, Courtney.
It's a lot.
Yes. So speaking of specialized practice, right? Um, you do equine therapy, which I think is super duper cool, right? I think it's so unique. I told you on multiple occasions that I had two different opportunities to have equine experiences when traveling and going to like a particular resort that offers these experiences. And I would not have known. I am not an animal person, so I just want to put it out there. Like a lot of people on my team, and I know a lot of people in the world, like love their cat, love their dog. I am not an animal person. I have no pets. These equine activities, the first one that I went to was not one that I signed up as like my first pick. It was my second one. I just didn't have some of the information that was needed for this other event. So I ended up in the equine event. It wasn't like my first pick, but I ended up there. And It was such an interesting and eye-opening experience.